Well, good afternoon. Are you ready for the best panel of the conference? We're not modest up here. We will be looking for those survey answers. Let me formally welcome you all to our panel today, Curbing Union Power. I will be introducing our panelists in a second. When I was asked to be moderator, they said, well, we need a title for the panel. And I said, well, how about smacking public sector unions all over town? And they said, Simon, you really need to tone it down a little bit. By way of introduction, I am your moderator today. My name's Simon Campbell. I'm an elected school board director. I also run a grassroots group called Stop Teacher Strikes. And as you can tell, I'm proudly born and raised in Mississippi. You don't believe me, do you? All right, but let me just say, as an immigrant to the United States, I do believe that every legal immigrant should be required to learn the language. So, yep, thank you. So the good news these days is that I am bilingual. I do speak English and American. It's an old joke, believe me. Let me just say, I think there is, if you think about the Revolutionary War, I'm the prime example of if you can't beat them, join them. There's one key difference between a naturalized US citizen like me and a native-born citizen like most of you, and that's the fact that I get to say really fun stuff in political dialogue that none of you can say. For example, when we're dealing with union issues, sometimes these folks, I'll just call them radical left-wing liberals, sometimes they get a bit stroppy with me, which I don't understand because I'm inherently warm and cuddly, but they'll say things like, "Go home, foreigner." And I'm like, listen, I am home, so be quiet and make me a cup of tea. Rule number one, confuse the enemy. But I got started on these union issues a few years ago. The teachers' union went on strike in my district, kicked all my kids out of school for a month, and I thought this really isn't very cool. So I've been kind of doing battle with them for a while, and to this day, people still say to me, well, Simon, why do you refer to the leaders of the teachers' union as being a bunch of Teletubbies? And I say, look, it's really not meant to be rude. It's just that I see certain similar characteristics. They jump up and down, flapping their arms about, making incoherent noises. You ever seen them testify? I keep waiting for the Senate Education Committee chairman to say, and our next speaker's Tinky Winky. But when I first got going, there was a strike. I kind of needed to find myself in my new country. So I went online, just to see where do I stand now I've settled in the US. So I took the online test at HillaryClinton.com, and it was interesting because the results came back saying that without my even realizing it, I had joined the vast right-wing conspiracy. And I was a little confused by this, so I called my dad up in England, and I said, hey, Dad, you won't believe it, but apparently I've moved to America and joined the vast right-wing conspiracy. You know what he said? Good for you, son. Could you bring some of that back here? Because we need it. Okay, Dad. But these union issues, they're exploding all across the United States, aren't they now? And people are finally waking up. And I play my own small role in it here. We've got some much bigger players that are going to be our panelists speaking in a second. But I was invited to debate the right to work issue by Fox News, the local affiliate in Philadelphia, a couple of months ago. They invited me on to debate this union official, from that big labor union, the UFO CIA. Did I say that wrong? Sorry. Oh well. And it was the 10 o'clock evening news, so we're having family dinner at home before I have to go down to Philly. I've got 3 young kids, and my wife's sitting there and she says, now listen, children, your father's just going out again this evening to play with the union. Wise guy. So I go down to Philadelphia, we go on the air, 10 o'clock news with this union official. And this is an old school Philadelphia union boss, and I'm thinking I'm gonna have some fun with this. So we go on the air, and I guess I must have said something to wind him up, I can't remember what. But in the middle of this segment, he got his knickers in such a twist, right, that he completely forgot my name. I mean, we are live on the 10 o'clock news, and he's like, I just want to say one thing to, what's his name? And the presenter's like, that would be Simon. And I'm like, that would be me. So he's storming out the building at the end of this segment with smoke coming out of his ears. And of course what happens, I go home, and the next morning my youngest daughter, Kate, she wakes up and she says, Daddy, did you have a nice time playing with the union last night? And I'm like, oh, yes, sweetheart, it was great. I was on TV and a union boss forgot my name. And she's like, Dad, what's a union boss? I said, never mind, sweetheart, your mother will explain it later. Off you go to school and tell your teachers today you're not allowed to learn how to make any picket signs. Sorry, I'm a little bit politically incorrect. Please forgive me. But listen, enough of me. We are going to our panelists right now. So what I'd like you all to do, please, while our panelists are speaking, there's cards on the tables. Write down questions for our panelists when you're at the tables. Instead of bringing them up to the front, hold them up. If you hold them up, someone will grab them, pass them up to me, and then I'll read them out, as many as we have time for our panelists. We'll do Q&A the rest of the hour. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to our first speaker, the Honourable State Representative John Baer.
Good afternoon. That's a hard act to follow. It's really good to see all of you, and it's nice to see how this conference has really grown over the years. Currently, I'm serving my third term in the House of Representatives and the Vice Chairman of Labor and Industry. And one of my favorite things to talk about is project labor agreements. Now, for most people, they don't know what a PLA is. But to put it really in simple layman terms, from a union perspective, project labor agreements are kind of like the Holy Grail. It ensures eternal life. When you look at it from a taxpayer perspective, it really is nothing more than the fleecing of America, another example of really policies that are a relic of the post-World War II model of government. So what I'd like to do quickly before I go into details of PLAs is kind of put all this in perspective, because we all have very good topics up here. And I want to start on a very positive note. That first, no doubt, these are difficult times filled with significant fiscal challenges. And while the obstacles may seem overwhelming, the opportunity presents all of us should not be. Because there's really no better time to be in the state legislature or to be in the whole elective office. And think about it. We, the elected officials of this Commonwealth, have a chance, a very rare moment in time, to truly challenge the status quo, ending discriminatory labor practices like PLAs, to make government more accountable, but most importantly, to give taxpayers a better return on their hard-earned tax dollars. And it's about time. So I think all of us can agree that government should be run with common sense, fairness, and transparency. And unfortunately, project labor agreements are none of those things. So what the heck is a PLA? PLAs are a form of mandatory unionism where contracts are drafted requiring all contractors, whether they're unionized or not, to be subject and their employees to unionization in order to work on government-funded construction projects. So think of it this way. Let's say you're XYZ Corporation, you're a merit shop, you just won an award to build your local elementary school, and by the way, is designated as a PLA project. Well, guess what? You now have really two choices. One, you can either unionize your workforce, or two, you can hire workers from the union hiring hall who you probably never worked with before. In other words, you have to use someone else's employees and pay them as your own. That is what PLAs do. They're the last form of legalized discrimination that some elected officials openly embrace and advocate for at all levels of government. But in reality, they're nothing more than a sweetheart deal for unions, and as I always like to say, coming in from the pay raise days, it's big labor's payback, payjack. So here's the end result. 80 to 85% of PA's construction workers choose not to be part of a labor union. Unfortunately, they generally don't get a chance to bid on these projects. And why should they? Why would they want to subject themselves to possibly hiring other people's workers and then be subject to other benefit legal issues down the road? So all this means for the taxpayers is less competition, resulting in higher bids and additional costs to the taxpayers. Now, one thing I want to talk about is the myths around PLAs. Because typically you hear a couple things. Advocates for PLAs will say, number one, they save money by having better skilled workers on the job. Number two, they ensure on-time delivery of the project. Number three, they ensure a working wage. Number four, they keep jobs local. 5, it results in a better end product, better quality construction. And lastly, it keeps illegals off the projects. All this is absolute nonsense. These are lies. Let's take the first one. They save money by having better skilled workers. So let's just take common sense. So you're telling me if the construction workers that choose not to be part of a union consist of 80 to 85% of the workforce, you're telling me that only 15 to 20% are skilled workers out there that are unionized? That doesn't make sense. And don't let them tell you that their training's better. It's not. Number two, on-time delivery within budget. Have any of you guys ever heard of the Boston's Big Dig? That was a PLA project. That's wrong. Assuring a working wage. What they always forget to tell you is all of these projects are prevailing wage jobs. I think we all know prevailing wage. That's a non-factor. Keeping jobs local. Well, here's a bigger problem. If 80 to 85% of the PA's construction workers are not unionized, what do you do if you have a PLA job in a non-union area? You got to pull the union people in. So much for keeping it local. Result in a better project and a better product. Well, I think we talked about it earlier. I mean, certainly to say that those who are unionized are better workers than those who are not, that's rubbish. And keeping the illegals off the projects, well, even open shops have to go through background checks for public jobs. So what I ask of you today is to really think and support all of us who are fighting to really ban PLAs, but more importantly, have open bidding at all levels of government. We have a House Bill 999. We just introduced it. We have about 41, 42 co-sponsors. We need you to call your legislators and to get involved in the process because we have this special moment in time. And we have some counties that are already starting to do this. Lancaster County, where I'm from, is the only county east of the Mississippi that's banned the use of project labor agreements. We need to expand that. So while the union has a 180-degree different view of our position, and maybe they see 999 upside down, don't let that deter you. This is our opportunity. We can get this done, and we need to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. If I could just remind everyone, write the questions and hold them up in the air. Our next speaker is going to speak to an issue I normally talk about, which is the Teachers Union. Please give a warm welcome from the Neshaminy Taxpayers Group to Larry Pastor.
Thank you, Simon. It's a great weekend to be here with all of you. 800 of my friends that are all sitting there hoping for a government shutdown. It's a lot better than sitting in my living room like this. Maybe if we all will it, we can get it to shut down. When they're closed, they're not spending our money. So I'm delighted to be here, and I've always liked to hear the stand-up comedy routine. It gets better every single time. I'm a taxpayer advocate with a really strong passion for education reform in this country. There's a big obstacle to education reform in this country, and we all know what it is. It's the teachers' union organizations, the National Education Association and the American Federation of Teachers. Let me read something to you. No matter how much political posturing we hear about educational reform, no matter how many scholarly studies are published analyzing the problems in our public schools, no matter how frustrated and concerned parents across our country become, no substantial improvement in education will occur until the stranglehold on our school system, now held by self-serving, adult-only focused, left-wing political movements called the NEA and the AFT, are broken. Now, that's a statement that could have been made a month ago in Wisconsin, could have been made by the great governor of the state of New Jersey, could have been made in Florida. It could have been made, in this room 10 minutes ago, but it was made over 2 decades ago by a great conservative, Reed Larson. And many of you know him as one of the pioneers in right to work in this country, 20 years ago. So there's 3 coincident events that have occurred in the past 30 years. And all of us in this room, I see a lot of gray hair like me, go back to the 70s and 80s where we thought our education system was in trouble. Guys, it was 30 plus years ago. Look where we are today. 3 coincident events have occurred. The teachers' unions grew like crazy over the last 30 years in power and money and influence. The other thing that happened was our taxes went through the roof. The reason I'm here with Simon is I looked at 25 years of investing in education through higher taxes. And what's the return we all got? On a global basis, K through 12 children in America ranked 25th in math. They ranked 27th in science. They ranked 15th in reading, with 36 other industrialized countries. This is not just a serious concern now. This is a national crisis that we have. And let me tell you why. 30 or 40 years ago, we were not a global economy. Today we are. Today we're trading across borders everywhere in the world. In the 70s and 80s, manufacturing was outsourced. It was labor jobs. Right? Look what happened to the unions there, right? And they drove that outsourcing. Now, knowledge workers are being outsourced because you can go to India or China or Belarus or Brazil and find highly educated, in fact, superiorly educated talent to outsource to. And why is that? Because we've let the unions run a monopoly in our school system for 30 years with their good friends, the Democrats. I'm going to go right to the punchline here. Here is the agenda that we need. Eliminate last in and first out with schools. We need to be able to keep the best teachers, not just based on seniority. Legislation requires notification of parents when they have an ineffective teacher. Increase transparency on the teacher's performance to everybody. Legislate limits on tenure or just eliminate tenure. To me personally, tenure is the biggest obstacle to reform. New salary schedules that are dependent on merit, not the fact that you can actually fog a mirror, which is the way it works today. Salary increases for advanced degrees. I want to tell you just a little story, and I'm just say a minute about what I represent in Neshaminy. In Neshaminy, they have something called MEQ. It's actually legitimate in the state of Pennsylvania. So they can go take courses in basket weaving and get credit for it for salary-only purposes. So we found in Neshaminy, for instance, just to give you an example of how corrupt this thing is, you got teachers taking online courses in 3 weeks for 3 credits and getting paid step levels for it. This is a pretty bad system. Ban strikes. I know I have to say that with Simon sitting here. And be able to furlough teachers. In the state of Pennsylvania, we cannot lay off teachers unless we do away with an entire program for economic reasons. We need to have school boards have the ability and power to control their destiny. Today they don't. This is a legislative agenda, and if you haven't looked at it, go look at studentsfirst.org. It's a campaign for reforming education in this country. It's led by the great former chancellor of the D.C. schools, Michelle Rhee, and I tell you, she is an American hero. What I just read to you was passed less than 30 days ago in the state of Florida. Why can't we pass it in the state of Pennsylvania? Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Please welcome our next speaker from the Keystone Associated Builders and Contractors, Vicki Kraft.
Good afternoon. The topic of this panel and the issues I'll be speaking about are timely and critical to our Commonwealth and to our country. Each and every taxpayer is impacted in one way or another. My topic is prevailing wage reform. My name is Vicki Kraft Kearns. I am the Chief Financial Officer for James Kraft & Son. I'm also the 2011 Chairwoman of the Board of Associated Builders and Contractors, the Keystone chapter. ABC is a construction trade association representing the commercial, industrial, and institutional construction markets. Our members are primarily and predominantly open shop or non-union. That means big labor absolutely loves us. In 1931, the Federal Davis-Bacon Act, so named for a Pennsylvania Senator James Davis and a representative from New York, Robert Bacon, became law. The legislative history of the act shows that Bacon introduced the bill after a contractor employed African-American workers from Alabama to build a Veterans Bureau hospital in his New York district. One of the biggest drivers of the bill was the fact that FDR's New Deal construction projects being delivered to congressional districts saw the jobs going to out-of-state workers, thus diminishing political support from local workers and constituents that would have been rewarded with the federal jobs. Many states followed suit and gave birth to the Little Davis-Bacon, or State Prevailing Wage Acts. The simple intent of the acts was to establish the paying of local prevailing wages on public works projects. Paying no less than the locally prevailing wages and benefits would give a great advantage to local workforces. For Pennsylvania, our meddling with free enterprise occurred in 1961. Fast forward to the day, and you can quickly understand the problems and the costs associated with the current system we, the taxpayers, now have. If the prevailing wage rates were actually the wage rates that prevail in the communities, there would be no problem. However, that is simply not the case. The prevailing wage rate today much more closely resembles the union collective bargaining wage rate than it does the true local wage rate. Think about this. The value of the state's construction contracts is $4 billion. Even if the percentage of savings is 10%, and we know it's much higher, think about the savings taxpayers would realize. Let me shift gears for a moment and speak briefly about some reform measures that can save the taxpayers money. Repeal the Prevailing Wage Act and let the market decide the wage rates. This is a fundamental tenet. The fundamental tenet of the free enterprise, and 18 states have elected not to have prevailing wage laws. Redefine or better define what the prevailing wage is. We suggest using occupational or market wages. This would not strip workers of family-sustaining wages. We're not talking about going from $50 an hour to $8 an hour. Place a moratorium on the Prevailing Wage Act, exempting school construction, and study the impact. Implement a local option, allowing localities to opt in to using prevailing wages on state-funded projects. Raise the threshold, currently $25,000, the arbitrary amount established in 1961, as the amount at which an owner must begin to pay prevailing wages, as long as this is not the only fix to the problem. Address the problem of out-of-control union fringe benefit packages. Fringe benefit packages are the dirty secret of this equation and a major cost driver. Let me explain. The wage scale on a prevailing wage job is comprised of a base wage and a fringe benefit portion. In the private industry, the average cost of benefits runs between 25 and 50% of the hourly wage of the employee. In the prevailing wage scale, the fringes run as high as 70.9%. The unions base their benefits on approximately 1,200 working hours, so they need a larger amount to pay for the same benefit. In an open shop, the wages are calculated using 1,920 hours, leading to a smaller contribution. The hourly scale of prevailing wages is really the tip of the iceberg. Taxpayers contributing $5 to $10 per hour more on the fringe benefit package by using the union model is a huge and wasteful burden. Clarify, publish, and make transparent all administrative changes with prevailing wages. The red tape, ambiguity, and random nature of enforcement causes a majority of quality contractors to shy away from public work, therefore decreasing competition, which is imperative for the best bang for the taxpayer's buck. For example, although laborers are on every job, there is no singular accepted job description. Open shop must guess, and during the Rendell administration, it's amazing how often they guessed wrong. In closing, I would like to stress that this is not an assault on workers that the union bosses would have you believe. Rather, it is an attempt to save taxpayer dollars. The prevailing wage law has not changed in 50 years. It's not fair to taxpayers that the same workers doing the same work get paid more, simply because the taxpayers are paying the bill. The time is now to bring common sense changes to this system. Unions make up a small percentage of the workforce in the private sector, only 15%. This is not an indictment of union workers, but it is a challenge to union bosses that have long gouged the public and created an adversarial relationship not only with their members, but with the public as well. In this time, when all are faced with making sacrifices, teachers' wages are being frozen, education budgets are being slashed, and all will need to find ways to do more with less. It doesn't seem right that the educational wing that will be built will be forced to use an archaic model for determining the wage rates that will result in a cost of 20% higher than it should. It's time we fix it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. Please give a welcome to our next speaker from Americans for Tax Reform. Well, please welcome Chris Prandoni.
Thanks for the intro, Simon, and welcome to the vast right-wing conspiracy. Good to have you. Yeah. My name is Chris Prandoni, and I run the Alliance for Worker Freedom, effectively the labor arm of Americans for Tax Reform. What we work on is similar to the other panelists up here. We think that if you're a teacher, you should not be required to join a union as a condition of employment. That if you're a construction company, you shouldn't have to hire union workers from union halls, and that you should be able to negotiate with those workers yourself how much you would like to pay them in wages and benefits. Seeing as I'm based in DC, not too much good happens down there these days, but I'll tell you what I've been working on for the past few years. So in 2008, as we all know, Obama came in. Democrats rode this huge wave into Washington, D.C. They had the presidency, the House, and a huge majority in the House, and 60 senators in the Senate. There was no more somber office in D.C. than Americans for Tax Reform that night. I can assure you that. But I digress. So labor unions, when they saw the makeup and structure of Washington, D.C., they were licking their chops. They knew their unionization rates were falling off a cliff, and that they needed some huge piece of legislation to return back to the glory days of the 1950s and 1960s, when there was 20% unionization rate in the private sector. As we all know, this legislation manifested itself in the form of card check. Well, as you also well know, the 111th Congress came and went, and there wasn't even a vote on card check. I would like to credit many people in this room for raising the issues with that. It's pretty incredible to think about that. We didn't even have a vote on card check. So, seriously, thank you. Thanks for making that such a toxic issue, incredibly important. But as we all know, unions are quite the worthy adversary, and they're going to get theirs. And so what they did is they approached the White House and said, we gave you guys $500 million to get you guys all in office. What have you done for me lately? And Obama and the White House realized that they weren't going to be able to pass anything through Congress. So what they did is they pivoted and started implementing all these ridiculous utilizing all these regulatory agencies to facilitate unionization. So they started appointing these old union workers to the old union lawyers to the Department of Labor, National Labor Relations Board, and National Mediation Board. Helinda Solis was now the Secretary of the Department of Labor. The first thing she does when she gets in there is start rolling back all the great transparency measures Elaine Chao introduced during the Bush years. So now it's harder for union members to see where their money's being spent. Craig Becker, I'm not sure if you guys know him, he was a recess appointee by Obama to the National Labor Relations Board. This is the agency that oversees employer union relations. If you look at their rulings they've looked at, nearly every single one sides with the unions and is anti-employer. They're also they're looking at issuing these ridiculous rulemakings. My two favorite to highlight are Sierra, the owner of this Perkins over here. The NLRB is considering rules which would require the owner of Perkins or any shop to give a union organizer their employees' email addresses and home addresses. And so they're looking at these issues. It's incredibly problematic, raises the specter of intimidation, exact same thing as card check. Another issue the NLRB is looking at is, say that Perkins owner over there allows Girl Scouts onto their property. Well, since you allow Girl Scout onto your property, a third-party entity, you're now going to be forced to allow a union organizer onto your property. So these are coming down the pipe. They're just considering them right now. We're not sure they'll come up. Now, trying to end on a positive note, the National Mediation Board is another federal agency that oversees the transportation sector. So your airlines and your railroads, essentially. It's a 3-member board currently comprised of 2 former union appointees, former union lawyers, both Obama appointees. In 2010, they issued a rulemaking which would overturn 75 years of precedent to facilitate union organizing, completely changed elections and how they were done in this industry. It was very problematic. We started yelling about this immediately after it happened. And then in early this year, when Republicans came in, they were very aggressive. They wanted to push back against these unions, so we raised this issue. Said, if you guys want to push back against unions, a great place to start would be to overturn this National Mediation Board ruling. So what Republicans did was included in the FAA reauthorization bill, they included a provision, Title IX, which would undo this National Mediation Board ruling. It barely made it out of committee with this provision intact. When it was during markup, Democrats offered an amendment to strip Title IX out of FAA reauthorization. We barely beat it off, 30 to 29. We lost 3 Republicans on that vote. And then eventually when the bill came to the floor, we knew we were going to see the exact same amendment being offered to strip out the good Title IX provision. This time it was offered by La Tourette, a Republican from Ohio. Incredibly, we fought off this. We fought off the amendment. We only lost 16 Republicans, which I know it sounds horrible, but this is a big victory. And the FAA reauthorization eventually passed with the Title IX provision in it. And so this is enormously encouraging. Yeah, please do. It's the first labor victory I've had in about 3 years, people, so come on now. Show me some love. So I think this is enormously encouraging. I think it scared the NLRB and the DOL because they know that Republicans are now taking a close look at them, and if they do pass these problematic rulemakings, Congress will overturn them. So I would just like to encourage you guys, keep the pressure up with your legislators, because the only reason, it basically comes down to this. Constituents versus unions, and the unions are so incredibly well organized that we have to keep pressuring our representatives so they don't get scared about this stuff. Thank you so much, guys.
Thanks, Chris. If I could just remind everyone, if you have questions for our panelists, please write them down and hold them up so they can be passed up to me. It's my distinct privilege and pleasure to introduce our next speaker, whom I've gotten to know the last few years. The first time I met him was when I testified on a teacher strike bill to ban teacher strikes. I had taken my 9-year-old daughter with me to testify as a Stop Teacher Strikes corporate attorney so she could read out the constitutions of some of the state reps, since I figured she would help them understand it a little better. And I remember most of these state reps, a lot of them, they just talk nonsense on this stuff. And I remember one particular state rep, I hadn't met him, he was saying things like, "What do you mean we're #1 in the nation for teacher strikes? Don't you people believe in public service?" And it's like, I wouldn't just end teacher strikes, I would end all teacher unions. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, wow, this sounds much more like it. So I said to the guy next to me, I said, "Who's that?" And he goes, "That's Darryl Metcalfe." And I'm like, "Oh, can I meet Mr. Metcalfe, please?" So it is my distinct privilege and pleasure. Please give a warm welcome to the Honorable State Representative, Darryl Metcalfe.
Thank you, Simon, for that introduction. I always appreciate hearing that story as many times you tell it. I remember your daughter sitting there with you. That was quite a hearing that we had, and you and I were able to tag team a little bit, even though we hadn't met yet. So I appreciated that opportunity. Appreciate your introduction today, and appreciate being with all of you. So thank you for the warm welcome. And once again, State Representative Darryl Metcalfe. I live out in Butler County, about 20 miles north of Pittsburgh, in southern Butler County, the 12th District, and have been the prime sponsor of Right to Work in Pennsylvania for many years, but I think this session is a... Thank you. This session, we have the greatest opportunity that we've ever had to move this issue forward, but it will not happen unless we generate grassroots support to the same degree that all of you work to generate grassroots support to repeal the pay raise of 2005. The right to work issue for me starts at a very basic foundational principle, and that's a right for individual freedom. How many here believe in individual liberty? The right of an individual to be employed, to enjoy the opportunity to have employment, to pursue their own happiness, to provide for themselves and their family. How have we ever come to that point in American history where we've allowed government elected officials being bought off by the unions to put a policy in place that would require that if you're going to work at certain workplaces, that you're going to be forced either into joining a union or paying a certain portion of those union dues to that private, politically driven organization just to have a job. Forced into association with individuals that you would not otherwise choose to associate with or even have a cup of coffee with, most likely. How is it that we've come to this in America? Well, in 22 states, we have not. 22 right-to-work states. We need to become 23. We need to end this compulsory unionism. And besides the very basic premise that I start from with restoring that very basic individual liberty, this is also about economic vitality, the economic ability for our state to create jobs. Tens of thousands of Pennsylvanians out of work in Pennsylvania, tens of thousands, and if we had a right-to-work policy, if we ended compulsory unionism, it is proven in state after state that has right to work that we would be economically thriving, not dying. We wouldn't be killing jobs, we'd be birthing jobs across the state of Pennsylvania. We need right to work in Pennsylvania. But unfortunately, as you heard from our ATR representative, some Republicans aren't with us on this issue. The Democrats have done a good job of buying off wholesale the Democratic Party. The unions have bought off the Democratic Party wholesale. But when you get to the Republicans, they've only had to buy a small minority of them, because if the Democrats are in control, if they're in the majority, then they're with the unions. If we're in the majority, they've bought enough Republicans off that they can join them with that minority of Democrats and still beat us. And that's why we need your help, to call on your elected officials to actually give us right to work. Just some quick statistics here. Between 2003 and 2005, private sector job growth in forced dues states was 2.3%, while private sector jobs in right to work states increased by 4.9%, or roughly 120% more. Jobs, jobs, jobs. Right to work will produce jobs. Besides restoring liberty, which is where I think we have to start at, we would see more jobs created. Right to work states, there's 28.3% growth in real personal income. The money that you have to spend for your family and for yourself, 28.3% growth in real personal income. In forced compulsory unionism states, it's 14.7%. So almost twice the real personal income growth in right-to-work states. The government sector unions are really creating a burden for taxpayers that just can't be carried any longer, aren't they?
That's right.
In the public sector, even some in private sector unions will acknowledge that, but their union bosses won't. They'll stand shoulder to shoulder. It's important for us to stand shoulder to shoulder as taxpayers, as the representatives of taxpayers who are fighting to protect all of you. It's important that we all stand together and stand against this onslaught, against the American way, by forced unionism type policies and by the clearly bought off policies that have been put in place here over past decades. But we need your help to do it. I was just, as Representative Baer was talking and as we were hearing Mr. Pastor's agenda for the legislature, I have been overwhelmed with contact from teachers' unions over the last month, as many of my colleagues have also. I'm getting emails against vouchers, against creating a situation for us to lay off school teachers for economic reasons, so you don't have the last in, first out. Get it backwards there. But we've been getting emails on that. Against Corbett's expenditures, in this year's budgets, the budget cuts, but just a slew of emails coming at us. I've never seen so many emails coming in. The teachers union is out full force fighting for their life, and we need taxpayers to be out fighting full force for the life of our future state and nation. We'll look forward to the questions, enjoy being with you, but we need you to contact your state legislators and the governor and demand right to work in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Okay, folks, we have a number of questions here. Thank you for the questions. Some of them are very interesting. The first one that I'll throw to Darrell and Larry. Actually, I'll just have a quick comment myself. The question is, shouldn't the public sector unions have to bill their membership for dues like a magazine, instead of using taxpayer-paid employees at school districts to collect? And the second question, which I'll address first, and then we'll go to the answer. Can school boards legally refuse to collect union dues? Yes. Here's the thing that most people don't realize. Under current state law, it is negotiable locally as to whether or not a school board agrees with a union to collect union dues. And payroll deduction of union dues, and by the way, PAC contributions, direct campaign contributions, is going on all over the state. Government resources are involved in collecting the teachers' unions' money and other public sector unions' money so it can be funneled through to influence politicians in the legislative process. And my attitude as a local school board director is very simple. I'm not collecting your money. Okay? And the reason you don't see the words union bagman tattooed onto my forehead are because I'm not one. You can collect your own money. We send them $680,000 a year, just my school district. Well, we all know where that money goes. And there was a news story recently out of Michigan where the school district didn't collect the teachers' union's dues. The teachers stopped paying them. The union had to start suing their own members in district court to collect their money. So, you know, it is a corrupting process when a private political organization is granted the right to use governmental resources to collect political money. So at the local level, school boards can say no, and at the state level, I'll hand it over to Darrell or Larry for a comment.
Thank you, Simon. And it's a great question, and one that we're actually working on. Representative Brian Cutler is working on legislation that we expect to see introduced to actually require, if a union is part of, working with a government entity, that union would not be allowed to use that government entity to collect those union dues any longer. I think it's, as Simon had said, I mean, this is a politically driven private organization. They should have to get their union dues from their members. They shouldn't be allowed to force the taxpayers into collecting those union dues for them. And Brian Cutler has legislation that's been drafted to do that, and we'll be seeing that introduced this session.
Thanks.
I'll just make a comment. I mean, you may have noticed from my opening comments that political correctness is not a long suit for me. So let me just say it very bluntly. The teachers' unions own Harrisburg. Let me say it again. The teachers' union owns Harrisburg. It took them about 30 years, but they bought Harrisburg lock, stock, and Democrat. And as you heard, there's a few Republicans out there that need to be addressed on this issue as well, because we need them on board with what we want to accomplish here. The teachers' unions not only own Harrisburg, but if you look at what we're talking about here, this is something called past practice. And with past practice in union negotiations or in things like this where a school board will try to reverse it, and kudos to Simon, because in their proposal to the PEA, his school district, they took it out. And it's the first time I've seen it in the state of Pennsylvania. You talk about a brave school board leader. Now, the problem's going to be is they own Harrisburg. They do pretty well in the courts, too, surprisingly enough. So what happens is when Simon gets this passed, they take it to court. And I'll tell you 9 times or 10 times out of 10 in a labor state like Pennsylvania, it'll get reversed in favor of the union. And it'll be because of past practice and because every major union organization will show up on the steps of that Capitol to make it not happen. Because once you do it in one, it'll get, so that's the power we're facing. And when Darrell asks you for help, I can tell you the one thing I want to say is this is the place you want to start, is in your school board, in your local community. That's your highest tax paid. You control this. I was just a simple taxpayer looking at this thing 3 years ago, and I tell you, I'm mad as hell and I can't take it anymore. And I'm at every school board meeting, and the school boards are at fault. You've got to elect people like Simon, and you've got to elect people that have the bravery and the gumption like Darrell in this city to get this done.
Question for you, Vicky. Does prevailing wage have the effect of potentially criminalizing employers? In the sense, I guess I'm assuming the question pertains to the bookkeeping they have to do, the reporting. Is it something that is onerous on employers?
Yes. We are required to fill out wage certifications that show that we are paying the proper wages. We are subject to audits. Most of the times when they come in for an audit, it's not because we haven't paid the wage rates correctly. It's usually because they've decided that we've paid them the wrong wage, that we paid somebody as a laborer and we should have paid them as a plumber, but they don't tell you what a laborer can do. So I figure if I have some guy hauling pipe from one place to the other, that's a laborer. It doesn't take a plumber to haul pipe. Well, that's not what they think sometimes. And if one of the penalties for violation is being banned from bidding public works for 3 years. So it is a very big burden for employers. They could lose their livelihood by making a simple mistake because the regulations are not clear.
Chris, do you believe that Obama's appointments to the Department of Labor are a backhanded way to have unelected people unduly influence public policy?
In a word, yes. This strategy by Obama isn't just labor specific. We've seen the Obama administration do this through their EPA regulations. They couldn't get cap and trade passed through the House, so what do? They're enlisting the EPA to do their dirty work. The same thing with the FCC laws. Congress wouldn't pass net neutrality, so they get the FCC to enact them. So this is absolutely a strategy implemented by Obama because Congress, they don't want any of this stuff. And so Obama's enlisting these unelected bureaucrats to do their dirty work.
John, what criteria determines the PLA project? And even if laws are overturned to limit union power, can it not be reinstated every time Democrats/unions return to power?
Well, basically, first thing is the law is mute on this whole issue. So basically, anyone at the federal, state, or local level, if you're a school board member, state doing a construction job on a prison, federal project, they can decide whether they want to have a project labor agreement in place. So if we pass, and when we pass House Bill 999, that will basically say that at all levels of government you cannot do this. And basically the criteria is that the government, whether it be the school district or the government body, decides to do this or not, they negotiate with the labor union on a collective bargaining agreement and it's done. I mean, no one knows about it. This is why we're trying to educate folks, because this is like, even when I talk to my Democratic friends, like, do you know what's going on with this? Like, are you kidding me? I'm like, no. So if we can educate people on this and say this is discriminatory and that we should have everyone has the ability to bid on this work and then use their own workers, it will solve the problem. But I don't think there's awareness on this issue. That's why we've been trying to talk out on it.
And just a quick follow-up, there's another one for you, John. PLAs, the question is, are they not a flow-down requirement of the Davis-Bacon Act?
No, they're not. This is everyone at each level of government has their own discretion whether or not they want their public project to be a project labor agreement job. It's up to the individual folks. So if your school board is doing this, talk to them and say, why are you adding this cost to us? Why are you discriminating against all the open shops in Pennsylvania from bidding on this work? Because I want to distinguish one thing. Anyone can bid the work. It's if you win it, you can't use open shop employees. That's the craziness. So no one in their right mind that's open shop would want to bid this work.
Darrell, instead of asking our reps to vote for right to work, we, in brackets such as Tea Party groups, should insist that our reps co-sponsor this legislation. Your thoughts?
Certainly, it would be great to have more co-sponsors of the Right to Work bill. I know from the Second Amendment issues that we've been working on, Castle Doctrine, the Second Amendment grassroots folks that I've been working with across the state, that's been one of their goals. Every year we have our rally, and they wander the halls and knock on the doors and meet with the legislators, and they really drove our co-sponsors right up over the top of where we needed it to be to have enough co-sponsors ready to vote for it that it would already pass. So if you're able to help me get 102 co-sponsors on the right to work, that would be ideal. So asking your legislators to co-sponsor would be great. At the very least, getting them to commit to voting for it and asking them to have our leadership run it will be key.
I'm going to throw this one open to all of our panelists. Feel free to chime in. As Wisconsin has demonstrated, unions have recognized they are in a fight for their lives. The question is, do Republicans? It's an interesting question. Anyone want to take that one?
Take a shot. I think a lot of Republicans do realize that this is a great opportunity. That's why Darrell and I are up here, and many of our colleagues are in the audience. You know, it's funny, after seeing what happened in Wisconsin, all of a sudden the things that Darrell and I have been fighting for look really darn moderate, you know? So when I'm in labor committee meetings, I'm like, listen, I'm not going to go Wisconsin on you. Just pass right to work and give me PLAs and do some reforms for prevailing wage, and I'll go home. But they don't even get that. So one last thing, and I'll stop. When we did the rally for Project Labor Agreements back in 2009, naively I thought, well, you know, we might get 100 people out, who knows. And I remember my secretary called in the morning, she goes, hey, John, I saw a bus pull over, and they're all wearing black sweatshirts, and it's the the roofers union. It's like, how many are? It's like 100. I'm like, maybe I'll get 100, 200. By the time I got to the office, we had 400 union members bust in throughout the state, by the way, getting paid by the hour, screaming down our 100 open shop guys who, by the way, were given up pay to be there. And I remember, the good thing is they didn't know what I looked like at the time, and the poor guy on the bus, or on the truck that we had the podium, they were like, Bear, go home, it's bear season. And by the time we got up there, it was like the Alamo, but you know what that actually created was to stand up to these guys and bully us. I mean, they had noisemakers, they didn't want us to be heard, they drowned us out, but all of us, like Darrell, others, it showed that we'll stand up to them, and since then, we won the majority back, we changed the composition of our labor committee, and look at these issues we're talking about right here today. Some of them are actually going to get done. So sometimes we have to be the irritant to create the pearl, you know?
Just while we've been sitting here, since our panel started, since 3:44 or so, I've received a dozen emails on the teacher issues from teacher union members. So I mean, they're flooding in. I mean, I'm receiving hundreds, and my colleagues are receiving those. Some of us, and that's what I had a nice little note from Jim Broussard the other day. I don't know if Jim's here. I assume he probably will be if he isn't. Citizens Against Higher Taxes, and he had said a nice little comment how, Darrell, you were a Tea Partier before the Tea Partiers were started. And I said, yeah, I've been a Tea Partier since Tea Partying was, before it was cool. You know, now it's cool. Republicans, I think many that have been elected in the most recent cycles get it. I think there's still some status quo establishment folks that don't get it. They hope to use the momentum of the Tea Parties, of the 912 groups, of the Liberty groups, and of the average taxpayer to their advantage. We've got to watch politicians. The majority don't tell you the truth. So you can't trust the majority of politicians. I used to be cynical before I ran for office. I'm more cynical now. Before I thought they were lying, now I know they are. So we need your help, and our colleagues that would normally be with us, with John and I on the issues that we're fighting for, right to work, PLAs, that normally would be with us, they're going to start to get weak-kneed, and their backbones are going to start to chatter.
You know, let me just...
they need your help.
Let me just make a comment about, and take it really down to a local level. I happen to have the privilege of going up against the most militant teachers union in the state of Pennsylvania, the Neshaminy Federation of Teachers. They've been without a contract for 3 years, and here's the reason why. They want free Rolls-Royce health care, the most expensive plan delivered in the state of Pennsylvania. They want 6% annual raises for 5 years. They want free health care and retirement. They haven't moved a centimeter in 3 years on those demands. We had a work to contract, and we've had a very militant response from this union over 3 years because they're outraged that the board will not give them this. We don't see parents backing down. You know, the old games, the old tricks that the unions used to pull, for some reason the parents are saying, are you crazy? I've been paying for health care for 20 years, and you don't want to pay for it? So we're the Tea Party, and then I started this 3 years ago, as you know, Darrell, and 3 years ago you kind of felt like you were a lone person screaming in the woods, and now with Wisconsin and Florida and Governor Christie, everybody's kind of turning on these guys, and they're isolated, and I think they're alone, and they're looking rather greedy. And I think parents are saying, I had enough of this.
Folks, we are coming to the close of our hour here, and I don't want Lohman shutting down the lights on us. Let me just thank you all for our panel. today. I'm going to leave you with these couple of closing thoughts. You may have gathered I do a little political incorrectness sometimes. I don't mind ruffling feathers when it's necessary, and I'm probably going to do that now. So if someone needs to escort me out, please do. But when we look at these issues, and you look at what's going on around the country in other states, I was kind of not that happy when I heard the governor's spokesperson say that he would sign a right-to-work bill if it reaches his desk, but that the issue is not a top priority right now. Now, I'll tell you something. To me, that is passive, weak, and unacceptable. And, you know, and I'll tell you why I use strong words like that. We've heard a lot about the economic benefits of right to work, but here's what it comes down to for me. And I say this as a naturalized citizen, someone who considers the US my home now. To force any United States citizen into unionism against his or her wishes for the right to get or keep a job is just a repugnant violation of individual liberty and an offense against the Constitution. And, you know, let me say, you know, thank you. When it comes to these issues, we need a champion in the governor's office. We need a lion in the governor's office. Someone willing to use the bully pulpit of the governor's office to lead the charge, to do town hall meetings all over the state, to rally public support and public opinion behind these vitally needed labor law reforms. And I'll tell you what, if Governor Corbett isn't sure how to tackle the massive, corrupting political power of public sector unions, then he needs to take one look at Governor Walker, Governor Kasich, and Governor Christie and figure out how to get himself in spinal cord. Thank you very much for your time. That's the end of our panel.